Everything must go.
And shipping is always free.
Visit DealDash.com and start bidding today.
In the face of the imminent release of the Nunes memos, the FBI took a bold public stand yesterday, urging against disclosure. In a written statement that reads in part, the FBI takes seriously its obligations to the FISA court and its compliance with procedures overseen by career professionals in the Department of Justice and the FBI. With regard to the House Intelligence Committee's memorandum, the FBI was provided with a limited opportunity to review this memo the day before the committee voted to release it. As expressed during our initial review, we have grave concerns about material omissions of fact that fundamentally impact the memo's accuracy. Justice Department officials told NBC News that the issues raised in the memo are so highly classified that they may not be in a position to point out errors or misleading statements. Let's bring in Washington correspondent for the New York Times, Charlie Savage, who yesterday had a detailed news analysis about what Republicans are up to with the Nunes memo. Charlie, what are they up to?
At the end of the day here, what this is about is going on offense as the best defense against Bob Mueller's Russia investigation as it heats up and gets closer to damaging President Trump and, by extension, the Republican Party. The chain of logic here is as follows. First, you conflate the entire Russia investigation with just the information gathered by Chris Steele. So you ignore the hacking of the Democratic emails, the use of social media accounts by Russian trolls to drive up dissension in the system and so forth, and you say all the Russia investigation is, the fountainhead of it, the beginning and the end of it, is this dossier of unverified allegations by Chris Steele, who was hired by Democrats. And you also say he probably made that up because this was about smearing someone who was running against Hillary Clinton. This wasn't about him actually talking to real sources who were telling him real things. So this is just about the Steele dossier. Then you say the investigators got a warrant as part of that investigation by going to a judge and using Mr. Steele's information without explaining to the judge adequately that this was Democratic paid-for opposition research. This is and you ignore all the other information that was in that application, stuff that the FBI cannot talk about to defend itself because that would blow every other source the country has for figuring out what Russia's up to, surveillance, human sources, and so forth. No, it's just Steele. That's all that this thing was, and you make that scandalous. And then the third step is the memo says Rod Rosenstein used this too because he signed off on resubmitting it to the court for an extension. That means he's now vulnerable to attack as also complicit in this Watergate level offense. Rod Rosenstein stands between Trump and Mueller. He's the only person who can fire Mueller. He has said he would refuse an illegal order to fire Mueller because the only way to make it legal is if he finds that Mueller has committed misconduct, and he has not seen any evidence of that. If Rod Rosenstein is fired because he used this Steele information and that was indeed scandalous or can be said to be scandalous, Trump can put someone else in that role who would be more accommodating and would be willing to say, I see that there's a reason to fire Mueller and shut down this investigation.
Right. And of course, what many Americans wouldn't see if this memo were released would be the supporting evidence that's actually classified that the FBI can't tell Americans that would disprove that it was all based on the Steele memo. I've got to say, Charlie, it's got to be so dispiriting to be an FBI agent right now because over the past 18 months, it's been like you've been watching a tennis match where first, you had the Democrats attacking the FBI during the middle of the campaign while they were looking into Hillary Clinton. Then you had the Republicans attacking the FBI after they didn't charge Hillary Clinton. Then you had the Democrats attacking the FBI after you had Comey and Strzok send out that letter 10 days before the election. And now, of course, you have the Republicans again attacking the FBI because they're actually investigating what Americans need them to investigate, and that is Russian interference and, well, actually, to see how many more members of the Trump administration have committed crimes. We're already up to 4, and this investigation isn't over.
It's clear that part of the rich tapestry of this extraordinary moment we've been living through is a frontal assault politically on the FBI and the Justice Department, the major institutions that are, at least in theory, supposed to protect and advance the rule of law in this country. I think they found themselves in a terrible position when both major candidates for president in the last election were the subject of open investigations. They didn't do that, but that's what they found themselves in, and the damage from that is only accelerating as the Republican Party clearly now is pursuing a strategy of investigating the investigators, which is having a corrosive effect.
Hey, Charlie, it's Willie. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of Paul Ryan, or another leading Republican who's not only going along with the release of the memo, but encouraging it. And if it's not in the protection of the president, if they're not doing this just to protect the president in the Russia investigation blindly, I think some of them actually believe that there is corruption in the FBI. I think some of them believe that those text messages between Page and Strzok actually indicate something inside the FBI that may have corrupted the investigation into Russia. Now, we've seen contradictions of that, including today that Peter Strzok actually was the one who wanted to reopen the investigation into Hillary Clinton. So I guess my question is, when you talk to Republicans, as you look at this, is this a heartfelt, sincere belief that there's corruption, or do you believe that they're just trying to form a bubble to protect the President of the United States?
So I think you're right to point to Paul Ryan. I mean, we keep talking about Devin Nunes, and this is the Nunes memo and so forth. None of this would be possible without Paul Ryan's backing.
Right.
He gave sort of an extraordinary press conference on Tuesday in which he said he was wanted the memo out, but was also sort of piously trying to say, well, this is not about attacking the FBI and Justice Department and even Bob Mueller. We should keep these things separate. Totally disingenuous. It's obvious what this is about. And the politics of this are just accelerating and taking this country in a place where we haven't been before. One of the reasons I think we can discount the claim, including from Paul Ryan, that this is just about worrying about civil liberties and worrying about Americans' privacy rights being violated by governments abusing their surveillance authority, is that Paul Ryan and Devin Nunes just last month, now that we're in February, just a few weeks ago, pushed through a 6-year extension of the National Security Agency and FBI's warrantless surveillance program, and in the course of doing that, suppressed and prevented the House from voting on a reform measure that had bipartisan support coming out of the House Judiciary Committee that would have imposed greater safeguards for Americans' privacy against abuses by government surveillance authorities. And so they clearly do not have that as a motivation of the political actions they're taking in real time.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much for being with us. We greatly appreciate it, as always. Bob Costa, let me ask you about the split. Is there a split between House Republicans and Senate Republicans? I know there were so many times when more conservative members of the House would go after Bill Clinton that Republican senators, even conservative Republican senators, would say, slow down, you're going to hurt yourself and you're going to hurt all of us in the process. And there was always reluctance whenever we got too far out there. Is there right now a concern? Is there right now a divide between, say, Chairman Burr in the Senate and Chairman Nunes in the House, and also rank-and-file senators in the Senate who think that running political obstruction for Donald Trump may end up hurting all Republicans in November?
You don't see Senator Burr's staffers at the Senate Intelligence Committee coming up with a memo that they're now trying to release publicly. It's a totally different approach in the upper chamber, and there is an evident divide when you're up at the Capitol between Senate Republicans and House Republicans when it comes to an approach, but they're not fighting too much, Joe, because so many Republicans in the Senate will tell you that when they go home to their states and talk to their Republican base, they're hearing every day on certain media outlets, on talk radio, that the FBI and the Department of Justice, those institutions are corrupt. And they know that the president believes that to an extent. And so they're not really willing to have this huge intra-party fight at this time. But they're very concerned, and they keep telling us there's the red lines firing Mueller. Everything else they hope will just pass like a storm.
Robert, you talked about...
Bob, can I ask really quick? One quick follow-up, and then to you, Susan. So, Bob, though, there's no doubt when we're trying to figure out why Paul Ryan is doing what he's doing and why these members are doing what they're doing, it's because among their base, these actions, having a witch hunt, going after the FBI, even releasing classified information improperly, their base supports that and their donors support that. Is that correct?
It's deeper than that. It's the members. Think about Speaker Ryan. And when you're at the Capitol, you see this up close. When he goes to closed-door conference meetings at the Capitol in the Capitol basement, members go up to the open mics and tell him to his face, release the memo. He's watching in the chamber as the president leaves the State of the Union. Members are leaning into the president of the United States saying, release the memo. This is the environment he confronts every day. It's an explanation of sorts for how he's acting. He will have to answer, of course, to history, as all of these lawmakers will, regardless of what happens. But there is this intense pressure, you sense it up there in the reporting, from these members to keep moving forward in the House.
Bob, there seems to also be a lot of divide within the House, the Republican side, on other big issues that the president is interested in, such as immigration reform, DACA, and also now on infrastructure. We know some Republicans still hold true that we should be able to not go further into debt. We know that there are some hardliners on the extreme right who believe there should be no path for immigration. Can you explain the problems and like what's kind of bubbling under the surface within the Republican conference right now?
Sure. I mean, I write about this in today's Washington Post front page with Sean Sullivan. You look at the February 8th deadline is coming up real fast for these Republicans in Congress, and they still disagree even about the president's own immigration proposal, the pathway to citizenship. Conservatives in the House don't like it. They don't like the spending proposals. They're bickering over spending in the House. It's going to be very difficult at this moment. That's what they're trying to figure out at this retreat in West Virginia. How do they get Republicans in both chambers to get behind a spending deal so the government doesn't shut down again?
All right, still ahead, the very latest on yesterday's deadly crash involving a garbage truck and an Amtrak train that was carrying a number of Republican lawmakers. We'll get a live report next on Morning Joe.
Ricky Fowler, John Rahm, and Phil Mickelson headline the greatest show.